Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Oden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Today, I am joined by Lauren Eden from Georgia. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
I was just saying to you, it seems like forever since I last saw you, and it's been like 6 weeks. But time sure flies when, we're busy raising families and also having fun doing things in the pro-life movement. You know, every guest that I interview has a different experience, a different story. And yours is one that thus far, I think probably a lot of people haven't thought about. And that is that, yes, I kind of delve into how babies survive abortions and what those stories look like. But the greater question, I think, is what happens when a woman stops her abortion?
Mm, yes, that is definitely part of my story. And, you're right, Melissa. It's not one a lot of people think about. But in my case, I found out when I was 21 years old that my mom had gone halfway through with a second trimester dilation and evacuation abortion procedure, and she stopped it in the middle out of fear. And that resulted in me being born at 26 weeks. So although I wasn't a survivor who was born alive in an abortion clinic, my mom did start a procedure and I was born alive as a result of that procedure.
And I think for a lot of people, I mean, even for survivors, right? When survivors come to us at the Abortion Survivors Network, they go, okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I know about my story. And then people kind of go, am I an abortion survivor? Because I don't even know what to call this.
Mhm.
So, what has this journey been like for you from when you first found out your story to then, when did you start to maybe ask more questions and did you ever see yourself as an abortion survivor and maybe when did you?
Well, that's a really complex question. I don't know if you remember the very first email that you ever received from me because I didn't know if I fit into quote unquote that category of abortion survivor. But I grew up in a very loving home. I was raised by my biological parents, and I always knew that I was born 13 weeks premature. But what I didn't know until I was 21 years old were the circumstances that led up to my premature birth. So on a summer day in June of 2004, after I had just graduated from college, my mom came into my room and told me that she had something that she had never meant to keep from me. She had always meant to tell me, but there just never really seemed to be a good time to share this kind of information with me. She had no idea how I was going to react. And I think there was a lot of fear for her in sharing my story with me. But that day, she proceeded to tell me the full story, all of the circumstances that had led up to my premature birth, the 5 visits to abortion clinics that she had been through. It's a very long story with lots of miracles along the way. But obviously, finding out that abortion was part of my story was life changing for me. And I knew from the very beginning when my mom told me my story that I needed to forgive my mom first and foremost. And I told her that day, Mom, I love you and I forgive you. And that was a healing moment for us. But I also knew that it wasn't a story that I really wanted to keep to myself. And so over time, I started feeling called to share my story. But it took a long time for my mom to be in a place where she was ready for it. So in January of 2020, I was just scrolling through social media and I saw a news article and it had a quote from you, Melissa. It said Melissa Ohden, founder of the Abortion Survivors Network. And it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. I went, Abortion Survivors Network? What's that? Clicked on the website, read through the whole thing, immediately fired off an email to Melissa and just said, I don't really know if I'm considered this or not, but I love what you're doing. I love what you stand for, and I feel called to share my story. And so that's kind of how our relationship began. This journey began of me wanting to share my story.
And I'm glad that we're talking about this because, first of all, if I'm being honest, our world has taken the words abortion survivor. And yes, for the pro-life movement or the conservative movement, that's spoken with love, right? The words abortion survivor. But when unfortunately some members of Congress, right, a particular side of the aisle, abortion supporters talk about us, the word abortion survivor doesn't have a very positive connotation, right? We're told that we're liars, we're fairy tales. I've been told over the years, oh, you must have just wanted to be famous. I mean, if people really knew me, they would know I would love to never leave my house. Really, if I didn't have to talk to people some days, that would be a good day for me. I'm a total private, introverted person, except God got a hold of me and turned me inside out. But for folks to infer that A, this never happens, or B, you must have just wanted to be this,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't know if you fit that term. You were just simply trying to figure out, this is my experience. I don't know what population of people exist that I fit in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I didn't know, if I would be considered an abortion survivor. And that was one of my first questions, I think, when I emailed you was, what does that mean exactly? Is it just someone like you, Melissa, who was born alive in an abortion clinic during a procedure? Because that was really the connotation that I had in my mind. But obviously you have championed, abortion survivor, educating people on what an abortion survivor and who an abortion survivor actually is. And I now realize, yes, my mom did start an abortion procedure and I was born alive as a result of it. So yes, I am one, even if she did stop that procedure in the middle.
Yeah. And I think there's something sort of empowering of taking that and naming it and saying, okay, so this is what it means to be an abortion survivor. It means that, yes, it can be a first trimester abortion. It can be second. It can be third. It can be any type of procedure. It could have been before Roe. It could have been during Roe. It could be after today. And all of those experiences matter. Not one
Mhm.
survivor is more survivor than the other survivor.
Yeah, I think our world wants to put degrees on everything and levels on everything. And the fact is, we've all shared a similar experience, as varied as they are, because there's so many abortion survivors who have very different stories. But the one thing that we've all had in common with every survivor I've met is when we found out our story, we thought we were the only one. And that is an experience we all share. So it's great to have a community of people that you have championed, Melissa, and um, we realize that we're not alone anymore. And that's an incredible blessing.
What happens when you find out you're not the only one? What was that like for you? What changed? What's different?
Well, I think that it gives you much more of a sense of identity with another group of people. There's a sense of isolation and rejection when you find out your story. For many of us, we were rejected. I mean, the fact was we were not wanted. We were rejected by our birth parents. And we found a sense of community and a sense of healing and a safe place, and a place where we can identify and know that we're not alone. And so I think that is very powerful.
Yeah, it's like joy, right? We take our joy and multiply it, and we take our sorrows and we divide it. I look back on, even the last 5 years for our organization and the things that people have gone through in their lives. And, I can pinpoint so many times where without the community of survivors, they likely would have had no one to turn
Mhm.
to, no one that they felt like they could trust. And I just, I can't put a number on that, on what that is worth to me, because for me, it is worth everything.
Absolutely. Those names and those faces and those stories are they're all just amazing. I'll never forget going to the first retreat that I got the chance to go on, in I believe it was Austin, Texas, and meeting 25 abortion survivors all in the same room and hearing everyone's stories. And before that point, it was almost like I had disassociated myself with, like, this feels surreal. This doesn't feel like my story. Like, some of the time it wasn't even believable to me that it actually happened to me because I don't remember it. I wasn't there for it. It feels like a whole different person's life. But then being in that room with 25 abortion survivors and hearing everyone's individual stories and realizing, I'm in this room because I am one. um that was a life-changing moment, and it was also life-changing in the sense that, um, I felt community, an instant sense of belonging and connection with all of those amazing people, and, a real calling to stand up for them and the voices of so many unborn babies who can't speak for themselves.
And you are one of those survivors who was raised in your biological family, so your parents married
Mhm.
after the abortion was stopped. And I've talked in other interviews with other survivors that there's also a real diversity in terms of how families talk about or don't talk about the abortion in their past. And so that sometimes is an obstacle for survivors in terms of, they may go through our healing curriculum and they might, participate in our community, but they might not ever share their story publicly. And sometimes people even kind of tiptoe around healing, going, if my family ever found out, that might make them feel uncomfortable, or I just know that I shouldn't do that. So, how have you navigated that as a family?
Well, as you know, it's been a journey. From the time that I found out my story, I think my mom felt like she could just tell me my story and phew, and breathe a sigh of relief. The weight would be lifted. I think the anxiety for her that was building up was she knew she had to tell me at some point, and it was like she thought that once she told me my story, that would be it. It would be done. She could go back to normal life. She wouldn't have to talk to anybody about it again. And she really hadn't talked to many people about it at that point when she told me. And so after she told me my story, it actually quite the opposite happened because it gave me a real sense of purpose and a sense of a calling, and that God didn't save me by accident. And I'm not called to just keep this to myself. I'm called to actually share this story with other people. And so it's been a journey because my mom at that point in time was not ready to talk to anybody else about it, much less really dive deep into all the details of the story with me. So I just kind of put it on a shelf for a little while, and then things would pop up in my life, especially once I was pregnant myself with my first son. I would go into that ultrasound room for all of my ultrasounds, and I would think about how my mom was the same number of weeks that I supposedly was, when she was going through from abortion clinic to abortion clinic. And it really put into perspective for me all that my mom walked through on this journey of trying to um, have this abortion procedure done and all the complications along the way and all the roadblocks along the way. It brought it all to life for me for the very first time. So at that point, I went back to my mom and I started trying to get details and, making sure that I had the story correct in my own mind because it was a very long story and I wasn't even sure if I had everything accurate in my own mind. Um, And I could tell that it was hard for my mom to continue to talk about it. And so I talked more to my dad about it than I did to my mom. And he's kind of the details guy. So he would give me all the numbers and all the dates and all the, all those things. And the more we would dig into it, the more I realized what a miraculous story it actually was, and all the pieces and all the ways God intervened in my life. And I just kept thinking, I just feel so called to share this. So it really was about a 20-year journey after I connected with Abortion Survivors Network, went through the healing curriculum. I started to really pray that God would work in my mom's heart and that somehow she would be ready and in a place where she felt like she could share. And um, through Jana, the lady that took my mom in after her last abortion attempt, um, she actually reached out to my mom and really encouraged my mom to write down her story. And it was completely unrelated to me talking to my mom. It kind of came out of left field. And that started the process of my mom really digging into her own story and her own emotions behind, why she wasn't ready to share. And through the Abortion Survivors Network, we finally did get the opportunity to share together, my mom, Jana, and myself, a couple of years ago. And that was very powerful and a very healing moment, I think, for all of us.
And I remember preparing for that, and we had decisions to make as a team of, what all stories are important, all survivors and all moms' voices are important, but we were looking at, really wanting to share the bigger picture of a survival experience, which includes the survivor and the mom and maybe extended family or other people involved. And I can remember thinking, her mom has never shared her story before. And I know that how it's been, an obstacle, something that your mom was working through. And I will never forget turning to our team and saying, you know what? We are the safest people that she could ever share it with. And even if we get there and she decides not to do it, it's worth it. And I stand by that. If your mom would not have done that interview, I would have supported her 100% and used that time to love on her, because I would know that that's what God wanted us to do at that point. But instead, we got to see your mom radically transform that day. I don't know
Mhm.
if you saw what I saw, but I will never forget that.
Yeah, it was amazing. Just the way that, I mean, her entire countenance, her body language, everything about her changed. It was like she had been carrying this humongous burden for so many years. And, this whole story that was in darkness for so long, it was this big secret that she had carried, and she was in bondage to. And she finally shared it with somebody. And that weight was lifted tremendously. And it was like just a sense of peace came over her afterward. And I think you mentioned that, Melissa, to her, but just how different she looked. And I've seen that happen every single time we've shared together to this point. The last time we shared together, I looked at her afterward and said, Mom, like, it's almost like it's easy now for you. Like the first time you shared, it was painful. It was hard, it was hard to watch her go through that whole process, and getting everything out there and knowing how emotional it was in the moment. And the last time we got to record together, she took the lead. She was so at ease. It was like such a transformation. And um she was like, I don't know what it is, Lauren, but yeah, like it feels so different now. That first time was the hardest time, and every time has gotten easier from there.
And I think as survivors who share our stories, we can relate to that, right? The first time you do it, even though you feel called to, you think,
It's
I
nerve
don't,
wracking.
yep,
Yeah.
I don't know if I could ever do this one again. And then you find out that, yeah, it didn't kill you. And you tend to often hear someone else's story, right? Somebody approaches you and, right, God intends for that, because that's what people desire, right? That is God's desire, for people to be seen and heard and healed and in community. And so as much as I think people think we're a blessing when we share, they bless us by sharing
Mhm.
with us as well.
We have, yes. Yeah, lots of people come up to us and tell their own personal story, and man, it is so precious to be entrusted with that. And I think there's a lot of people who feel like, I mean, they've never told this story to anyone else. Even men, the last event I was at here in Georgia was at the Georgia Capitol, and it was a pastor's day at the Capitol, and the men who came up to me and shared that they had a similar experience to my dad, that they didn't, maybe didn't want their wife or their girlfriend to go through with an abortion procedure, and didn't know how to approach that. Um, and it's so powerful when you feel like you can relate to somebody who's had that same experience, because for a lot of people, they haven't shared that with anyone else. And so, what a gift it is that they entrust that to us and share that with someone else. And I hope it brings them, one step closer to healing. Because that's what I've seen in our journey together, is that every time my mom or my dad or I have been able to share that and help somebody else, it brings more joy and more healing to our lives. And I think my mom has even said, if this helps one person heal, then it's all worth it.
Yeah, what would you say to men who are, listening to this podcast and maybe they were in your dad's shoes and just like you said, right? Girlfriend, wife went and had an abortion and, unfortunately, they weren't given your dad's opportunity to stand up and travel and save their child's life. But maybe they were, maybe they drove someone to the clinic, maybe they paid for it. Maybe they said, "Hey, it's your choice." Maybe they said absolutely nothing. What advice or encouragement would you have to men who are listening today who have played some sort of role in abortion?
Well, I would say that I've seen the power of forgiveness firsthand, and that our God is a loving God and He's forgiven you. And the hardest thing with my mom, and because she was the one who made the decision to go to that abortion clinic, was watching her carry that burden for so many years. And I'm watching her knowing, Mom, I have forgiven you and God has forgiven you, most importantly. And you have to forgive yourself. And that's the hardest part, I think, at least what I've seen with my own family. And so I think that for a man who's in that same situation, the world would tell them that they shouldn't have a say. It's not their body, it's not their choice. And, they were probably making the best decision they could with the information they had at the time. But there's just so much power in forgiveness and finding healing and knowing that there's no unpardonable sin, right? There's nothing that they could do that would ever keep God from forgiving them. And so um, I just would say that you are forgiven, that you are loved, and that we serve a loving God who wouldn't want you to walk with this alone, and that He's carrying this burden for you. And um, you can live in that freedom and in that hope.
And there are so many resources available to folks after abortion. As we're talking about life beyond abortion, we're not just talking about life, we're talking about abundant life for people to find healing. And so, you add to my list, but I'm thinking, Support After Abortion nationally does incredible work. We have, the folks at Silent No More. We have Rachel's Vineyard, Project Rachel. Pregnancy centers tend to have their own healing groups or they utilize those national resources. We have Forgiven and Set Free, Surrendering the Secret, Save One. Who am I missing?
I would say for Men for Life is a great resource as well. But you've covered a lot of them.
And I think it's important that we highlight that because as we talk about abortion survivors and even, abortion that is quote unquote successful, men need to know that they are impacted by that and that there's a place for them to go for support.
Absolutely.
What has surprised you on your journey or maybe your family's journey? What have you learned maybe about yourself or about abortion or about healing? I just love to hear that.
Every step of this journey for me, I was just sharing with somebody else, has been amazing, God ordained surprises around every corner. It was like when I finally said yes and took a step of obedience after connecting with ASN and, meeting abortion survivors, I sat on the sidelines for quite some time. I wasn't really sure, what I wanted to do, if I wanted to move forward, if I wanted to share, if I wanted to jump in, if I wanted to be identified publicly as an abortion survivor, if I wanted people to know my story, just like, there were so many questions. It was safer and easier just to live in my own little world and not really tell everybody what that I had discovered this, new label and this new secret and this new identity. And I have been blessed beyond measure, with not only connecting with ASN, with the support system of ASN, with meeting so many abortion survivors, finding community with them. The relationships that we have are amazing. And every corner I turn, I feel like God surprises me in such a powerful way. I know you know this, Melissa, but I just spoke at the Arkansas March for Life. And I never would have imagined that God would take me back there to share my story in the state where I was born. I got to share some really specific details. The clinic that my mom first went to when she came back to Arkansas, that was a pro-life clinic. The name of the doctor who delivered me, and after the march, I turned around and this lady came running up to me and she said, "I'm the doctor of Dr. Simmons, the doctor that delivered you. And our entire clinic is here. And can we take a picture with you and your mom?" And my mom was there with me and Jana was there as well. And um, never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that God would have put all of that together, would have put all of us in one place together to have that experience. So just every time I turn around, God does something new and more amazing than I could imagine. And I just think He keeps confirming, Lauren, you're on this journey because I've called you here for such a time as this.
And who are we to be held back by our culture, right? I mean, I understand why we're held back in our culture that is, been lied to about abortion and about abortion survivors and pitted your mom against you and my birth mom against me. So, I mean, I get it how we face what we do, but at the same time, yeah, so much of your experience, even how the words your mom first used to tell you about surviving, right? I will never forget my mom speaking similar words. And, the first time I met like 20 some people who used to pray outside of St. Luke's Hospital that the abortions would stop. They were praying when I survived.
Mhm.
I've met medical professionals who cared for me. I mean, the list could go on, and that's where like that's the stuff I'm so super passionate about, but I also sort of get a little righteously indignant about to our culture to say, you know what? When you are silencing the women and the men and the survivors and the families and the clinic workers and the abortionists impacted by all this, you're thwarting God's will to do those amazing things that He's done in my life and in Lauren's life.
Mhm.
And man, yeah, it is the most like exhilarating thing. Nothing surprises me anymore. I love when people are like, "You're not going to believe this." And I'm like, "Oh, but you've come to the right person. I will believe anything because I see what God keeps doing." So,
Mhm.
yeah, I just love that God does. He gives us this confirmation and right, it's like we get to take this little bit of what he's done and the confirmation and then we get to speak it, we pass it along to someone else.
Yes.
It's like that little spark of fire that just keeps going.
Yeah, another man came up to me, at the Arkansas March for Life, and, he was just in tears, and he started telling me his story, um, and he was talking about a daughter, I believe it was a daughter that he, and his significant other at the time had aborted, and, um, and he was talking about the birth date of July 26th, which is my birth date. And he was like, I didn't really know why I was here today until you said the day that you were born. And then all of a sudden, God just hit me. That was the same birth date. And so just little nuggets like that. I mean, God is in every detail, and he uses those to bring healing and hope and restoration to people. And that's exactly what happened in that conversation. He just said, I know that I was here to hear your story today for God to encourage me. And it's just so amazing to see how he really does work all things together for the good, and allows us to be a part of that, a part of bringing hope and healing and redemption to people all around us.
Yeah, it is the most exhilarating thing to follow the Lord, isn't it? When people are like, "Oh, it must be boring." No, give it a try.
Never a dull moment for sure.
Yeah, never a dull moment. Speaking of never a dull moment, I want to give people the opportunity to know, where they can see or hear more of your story, your mom's story, how to follow you on social media, and, how to possibly book you for speaking events. You're a gifted communicator.
That has definitely been a process as well. And ASN's speakers training has been a phenomenal help with that. But I would love, to share my story, or for people to be able to go on abortionsurvivors.org, and you can hear more of my story. You can actually see my mom's side of the story as well as Jana's, either on ASN's website or their YouTube channel, and also my social media on Instagram. You can find me at Lauren Eden _pro-life speaker, and on Facebook, Lauren Eden abortion survivor.
That's awesome. Yeah, you put out great content. I love following you, and I also love seeing how you not only repost a lot of things about what's happening in Georgia, but how you're cheering on other survivors as well. I mean, nothing brings a smile to my face more than seeing survivors cheering one another on that journey.
Well, you are the epitome of that, Melissa. So I'm just thankful for you and glad to pass that on. I'm definitely a cheerleader for my friends at ASN. So I
We're
enjoy
being that fire, just like we were talking about, right? Taking it
that.
and passing it on.
Absolutely.
Well, Lauren, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode, and I want to thank the audience for joining us for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. You have courageously shared your life beyond abortion story with us. And, I know you know this, but I just want to remind you, your story matters because you matter. And you do a great job of reminding other people of that as well. If you've been touched by what you've heard today, I encourage you to share this episode and help us amplify the truth about life beyond abortion. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to review our podcast to help us spread these stories and these truths, transforming our culture one story at a time. For more information and to connect with the community that you've heard so much about today at the Abortion Survivors Network, you can visit our website at abortionsurvivors.org. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Abortion Survivors Network, or on X at ASN Official.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaoden.com or by following her on Instagram at melissaoden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.